The Donaldson's Decorations by the Prowler. Mr. and Mrs. Donaldson had the best house on the block when it came to Halloween decorations. There was at least a new piece in their yard every Halloween, and they were the #1 house to go to for the best candy. Every kid in the neighborhood knew that. Hell, every kid in the surrounding neighborhoods knew this. Their decorations were also so lifelike. The bodies, the limbs, the blood dripping. Year after year, they would outdo themselves from the previous year. Sadly, though, Halloween was starting to be not as fun in our neighborhood as of late. You see, the past couple of Halloweens had a rash of disappearances around our neighborhood. So when Halloween night came upon us, everyone was on their guard. Emotions were tense. The children were under the strictest of supervision. No one was ever to roam freely, not even if we were in groups. Halloween just wasn't as fun as before. It was last Halloween. Me and my friends were out trick-or-treating. We were all getting older, so this was probably going to be one of our last times going out together. We had already gotten lots of candy to this point when we approached Mr. and Mrs. Donaldson's house. The pathway was lined with tombstones, zombies coming out of the ground, fake bodies hanging from trees, and fake bodies strewn all over the lawn. There were orange and purple lights strung on the roof, emanating an eerie glow across the front courtyard, and a thick fog wafting across the lawn from the fog machine. The Donaldsons really took care of every detail in their display. As we walked up the front steps of the porch, we knocked on the front door. After a few seconds, the door opened, and we were greeted by the Donaldsons. They both had their usual big smiles on their faces and greeted us warmly. We were in a rather large group, and they had been handing out candy, of course, the best in the neighborhood, and also Mrs. Donaldson's homemade cookies. But halfway through our group, they ran out of both. Mr. Donaldson's grin turned into a scowl, then turned to his wife and screamed at her. And I don't mean just screamed. He absolutely unloaded every name in the book at her. Our mouths collectively dropped, staring at the two. Just then Mrs. Donaldson smiled and told us she was sorry for running out of treats. Then she looked at her husband and just continued smiling, reaching for the door and slowly closing it. There was no sound, and we all just turned around and walked home. The next day we all saw Mrs. Donaldson starting to clean up her yard and take down her decorations. The strange thing, though, there was no sign of Mr. Donaldson helping, not even with the bigger pieces. We all shrugged it off and just figured he would be out later to do it. By the next morning, all the decorations were gone, and we figured Mr. Donaldson came out and did it, even though, looking back, no one ever saw him do it. As a matter of fact, Mr. Donaldson wasn't seen out and about after that Halloween night. There was always an excuse. He was always away, at the store, visiting a sick relative, sleeping, or sick in the bathroom. Well, here we are on Halloween night a year later, and me and my friends were hanging out on the sidewalk under the Donaldson's tree, right below one of the hanging body decorations. Out of nowhere, my friend screamed, "Watch out!" and pushed me out of the way. We both hit the ground and the hanging body fell. As it fell, though, the bag around its head tore on the top point of the white picket fence, and when it hit the ground, we all found out what happened to Mr. Donaldson. Exposed through the tear in the bag was his face, staring back out at us, with one eye missing. We all jumped back and screamed. My one friend took out their cell phone and called the police. When they arrived, they confronted Mrs. Donaldson, and she confessed right on the spot. The police also discovered, as they searched the rest of the yard, the bodies of the people that went missing over the past few years. The Donaldsons' Halloween display was riddled with actual carnage, and none of us ever knew it. It came out that they had been abducting people for years, always adding a new Halloween piece to the yard. And last Halloween, all it took was that one scream to send Mrs. Donaldson over the edge. She said right when she closed that door on us, she took the glass bowl and smashed it over his head when he turned and walked away, using the glass shard to cut his eye out and slash his throat. You just never can tell, can you? No matter how young, no matter how old, no matter how sweet, you can never truly trust your neighbors. The Rosary by the Prowler. Please won't you sit down, Father Trepoli? My name is Father O'Malley, and as you know, I will be conducting your retirement interview for the documentation of your accomplishments and decorated career as the leading exorcist in the Catholic Church and the Pope's only trusted advisor when it comes to these matters. This interview is meant to be an historical document and will be later stored inside the Vatican Library, so it may be a future reference for young priests who choose to enter the field of exorcisms. Let us start with your full name, please, Father. Father Fiodoro Trepoli. And when did you enter the priesthood, and for what reason? As early as I can remember, early teens, I'd say. I entered the priesthood shortly after I became orphaned from my parents' demise during the uprising in Palermo in the early 30s. How long did it take for you to get into exorcisms, and how were you introduced into it? Quite a few years, actually. I probably was introduced into that world 5 years after I became a priest. I was brought into it by the senior village parish priest, a Father Roberto Anatoli. He was getting up in age and needed an apprentice to continue his work in the region. I was hesitant and a non-believer at first, but I quickly realized that priests that conduct exorcisms are real and are needed. Tell me about your first exorcism, Father, if you would, please. Yes, a very difficult case. You could say I wasn't eased into this world. On the morning of October 20th, 1969, myself and Father Anatoli were summoned to a farmhouse on the outskirts of the village Santo Felice. We were there to examine a young adolescent named Frederica Stilozzo, the daughter of the farmer. He had been complaining of strange happenings with his daughter, violent outbursts, even of the physical variety, blaspheming of the church on countless occasions, being abusive towards her mother and siblings, speaking in an ancient tongue that she would not know of and that hadn't existed in centuries. But most recently, she was found in the barn, kneeling over the family's dairy cow, completely covered in blood, with satanic symbols carved into her and the cow's flesh. We arrived and investigated the family and the young child, and collected every useful piece of data we could find. And after our investigation, we concluded that Frederica was in fact possessed. We called our superiors and informed them that we had a real case, and they made it clear that this was the most urgent of priorities to get taken care of. We informed the family what was to transpire and had them seclude Frederica to her room, strapping her to her bed for her protection and for ours. We went back to our parish only to retrieve our kits, and we returned to the farm before nightfall. The home was quiet and eerie when we re-entered the home. We were greeted by the father, who was sitting at the kitchen table, head in hand. Father Anatoly asked him to come with us upstairs and assist us, stating having the presence of a loved one will help expel the demon all the quicker. I'll never forget, when we reached the top of the stairs, Father Anatoly put his hand on the handle to the door, paused, then spoke. "Steadfast, gentlemen, when we enter this room, make no mistake. What we are staring at is no longer a sweet, innocent child, but a warrior cast from the depths of hell to do its master's bidding. An unholy demon is what awaits us, sirs, and you will do well to remember this." He looked at me and said, "Prepare yourself, young Father Trepoli, for we are the last line of defense. We must cast this evil back to the pits from whence it came." He slowly turned the knob and we went in. There, sitting up in her bed, looking sweet and innocent, was Frederica. Father Anatoly motioned her father to stand near her in the corner of the room. Then me and Father Anatoly sat down our bags and retrieved our tools that would help expel this evil. We were warriors of the church, and we had quite the arsenal. First, holy water blessed by the Pope himself. Second, a pair of ancient Bibles said to be blessed by St. Peter himself. And the third, 2 crosses containing a splinter from the cross Jesus was crucified on in each of the handles. We stood at the foot of the bed, prepared for what was about to come. Frederica looked at us and started whispering sweet nothings of forgiveness, looking at her father and innocently begging to be let out of her restraints. Father Anatoly shouted, "Come forth, demon! Show yourself and leave the body of this innocent child at once!" Then splashed the blessed holy water across her body. At that very moment the water hit her body is when that innocent facade changed quite quickly. Her head snapped quick towards Father Anatoly, grinned the most evil of smiles you've ever seen, and began chanting in an ancient form of Latin that hadn't been heard in centuries.
Nex adu immortalis, libri spondeo nex, adve hoc mort animadvertor, operor non timeo, salus est proculamanus.
She began to twist and shake the bed violently, loosening her restraints in the process, freeing one arm. Father Anatoly shouted for her father to grab hold and restrain his daughter, and try to calm her as best he could, whisper sweet nothings into her ear, and try and bring her back to the light. We stood over her, Bibles in hand, citing the Lord's Prayer, demanding the demon to reveal itself and tell us its name. After a few moments, she stopped thriving and looked to her father, speaking innocently again, as if Frederica had returned. He became fooled long enough for her to bite his neck and throw him across the room into the wall by the door. Father Anatoly then placed the holiest of Bibles on her while she was distracted, and shouted in Jesus' name, "Reveal yourself, demon!" Just then her body began to convulse and twist. She sat up quick and shouted, "Calquata!" Now that we knew the demon's name, we began to drive it out of poor Frederica's body. But just as Father Anatoly was about to expel the demon and contain it in the specially blessed Rosary, the demon Calquata summoned one last ounce of strength and grabbed him by the throat, then threw him into the corner of the room head first. I was the only one left who could do something. She was shaking and twisting more violently than ever at this point. Any moment she was about to free herself from her restraints, so I quickly leapt to Father Anatoly's body and retrieved the rosary, picked it up, then turned and placed my cross to her forehead, weakening her momentarily. Then I shouted, "In our Lord's name, I expel you!" I then quickly placed the rosary to her body and expelled the demon from this earth forever. My goodness, Father Trepoli, that was quite the first encounter for you. Tell me, what became of the girl Frederica and Father Anatoly? Frederica never had any problems ever again. She got married to a local boy and had a few children and is residing off on some countryside, somewhere surrounded by her grandchildren. Father Anatoly, I'm afraid, was never the same after the incident. He suffered a stroke after he was thrown into the wall and was left paralyzed. He wasn't able to continue his duties and died shortly after the incident. I was brought up to fill duties after Father Anatoly's illness and eventual death. I was now the senior exorcist in the region. Even though I was young, I was prepared for the journey I was about to embark on. Ah, yes, Father Trepoli, and what a journey it has been. Let us proceed, shall we? Father O'Malley and Father Trepoli's interview continued for hours. Case after case was discussed in painstaking detail, from his most grueling of cases to the simplest, the most dangerous to the most innocent. Subject after subject, demon after demon, was rattled off with every stroke of a new bead from the blessed sacred rosary that Father Trepoli held in his hand. The horrors that each bead contained would bring humanity to its knees if it was ever discovered or destroyed. The rosary never left his side. He held on to it as if the fate of the world was at stake. And it was. Only a select few in the church knew the importance of the rosary and the ancient horrors it contained. And if it were ever to fall into the wrong hands or be destroyed, that it would end all life on earth as we know it. There sits the weathered, aging priest in the center of the room, with the weight of tremendous importance resting on his shoulders, the protection of humanity. But he sits there, head held high, for he is unshakable. A dispatcher's worst nightmare. Bexar County Emergency Services. This is Alice. What is the nature of your emergency? Hello? A man's voice speaks up.
Yes. Hello, Alice. I think you should send the police and an ambulance here immediately. If you wait too long, a coroner van may be more effective.
Excuse me? Alice asked. Sir, are you injured? What is the address of your emergency? The man responds.
The address isn't important just yet, Alice. Have you sent the police and an ambulance yet?
Alice responds. Sir, I'm not seeing your information on my screens. No phone number and no location. Would you happen to be on a prepaid phone? I can't seem to trace your... The call is ended abruptly. Hello? Hello? Alice lets out a frustrated sigh, pushes back her chair, lowers her headset, and just pauses for a moment. Her supervisor came by and asked Alice what was wrong. Alice responded, That was the strangest thing. Creepy even. A call just came in with no information, and this man said that I needed to dispatch police and an ambulance immediately, but won't tell me the nature of his emergency. He also said that if I don't hurry, The coroner would be necessary. Her supervisor responds with a reminder that it's Halloween night and that prank calls are going to be expected for the next few hours. That just didn't sit right with Alice. Something in that man's voice sounded sinister. She spent the next few moments staring at her screens and sitting on the edge of her chair, just waiting for the line to ring again. The emergency center here is always busy, buzzing like a beehive with calls and activity. Halloween night brings out the crazy in people. The hive is usually buzzing a little extra on this night. Alice had calls about hand injuries from carving pumpkins, pedestrians being struck by cars during trick-or-treating. One call was from a mom whose child had a severe allergic reaction from face makeup. She never knew what is going to be on the other end of that call when she picked up. Alice thought to herself, "Boy, I'm glad my kids are safe at home. They should be home for trick-or-treating by now. I hope they don't eat too much candy. I hope they save me some Reese's cups. I'll call them during my break here in a little bit," she said to herself. Just then, her headset rings and the screens light up with a new call. Alice was immediately anxious and answered right away. "Bexar County Emergency Services. What is the nature of your—" The man's voice says,
I thought I told you to send the police and a damn ambulance, Alice.
Alice says, "Sir, please tell me the address of your emergency. Who is hurt? How many victims are there? Please just tell me where you are so that I can get you some help. Hey, this isn't a Halloween prank, is it? There are real emergencies that need my attention." The man pauses, breathes heavily into the phone, and growls out the words,
There are going to be 2 victims. I believe they both have just gone inside the house. They just finished trick-or-treating from the looks of it. Great costumes, too. Looks like a teen boy who went as Michael Myers, and his younger sister who went as Ghostface.
With frustration in her voice, Alice says, "Listen, sir, I need to know what's going on there. I have no address to go by to send help. Whose kids are you looking at? And who is injured? If this is a prank, I'm hanging up. Sir, do you know these kids? Are they okay? Are you inside or outside with them?" The man pauses again and then says,
I've been following these 2 since they left the house, earlier to go trick-or-treating. I watch them often, actually. It's amazing how little their mother is actually home with them. Sad, really. Their mom works nights mostly, leaving them defenseless. It would be a shame if something tragic were to happen to them tonight.
Alice, almost shouting into her headset at this point, says, "Listen to me, you piece of garbage. Have you harmed those children? I want an address now." The man lets out a gruff, raspy, slow laugh and then says,
Well, I haven't harmed them yet. Right now I'm just watching them from outside. I'm looking into their kitchen windows. Nice kitchen. Great house, actually. It would be a shame to make a mess in there. Oh, look. Cute dog. That's a border collie. Right, Alice?
Just then, every single hair stood up on every centimeter of Alice's body. While trying to hold down vomit, she composed herself enough to say to the man. She takes a long, deep breath and says to him, "Please, please, Just tell me where you are. Give me an address. I beg you to just leave those kids alone, sir." Alice continues to plead with the strange caller. "You don't want to hurt those kids. Please just leave them alone. Won't you please tell me the address of the home? Sir, I have kids of my own around those ages. I beg of you to spare their lives." After a very long pause, the man responds with the chilling response of,
"Oh, Alice. Alice, Alice, Alice. I think you should have gone with your gut earlier. You should pay more attention to your son and daughter, or something terrible could happen. I'm here alone with your kids, Alice. I think you know exactly what the address is. Better fucking hurry."
The Vampire of New Orleans. It was not a surprise or rarity for a port city in the latter colonial years to be rough around the edges, a place you wouldn't want to take the missus on a Sunday stroll, so to speak. And the port city of New Orleans was no exception. The landscape could be rough for a southern gentleman to linger into, from pirates and cutthroats to salty old seamen, grizzled seafarers and laborers in the midst of their duties don't always take kindly to the softer crowd invading their territory, don't you know? The port of New Orleans wasn't particularly violent heading into the autumn of 1802, but that all seemed to change with the arrival of the Widow's Weep, a vessel that came from the province of Aquitaine off the shores of France. She was mostly a cargo ship, but on this particular voyage she was carrying a large collection of a young count's personal belongings. His name was Count Louis Valois, whose family is one of the oldest in all of France, a descendant of kings. His family's manor in Aquitaine was one of the oldest and finest in all the lands, but the Count wanted to change and decided to travel to America. On board the Widow's Weep contained all of his personal belongings, some very large containers, as well as multiple crates. The Count's name was also on the ship's manifest, as well suggesting he was also on board. However, on the evening of November 19th, the Widow's Weep appeared on the horizon without warning. Its lanterns dimly lit was the only sign you could tell it was approaching. The harbor master and his men tried to signal for the ship to stop, but their efforts were useless. The ship just kept barreling towards the docks. As the ship neared closer and closer, the men on the dock scattered, and just as they did, the ship crashed where they had just been standing. The ship rested up against the destroyed dock and just bobbed up and down in the water, eerie and lifeless. The harbor master shouted for the captain on the Widow's Weep, or for any of the crew to make their presence known, but there was no answer. The ship was dark and quiet. Only the soft glow from a few lanterns illuminated parts of the upper deck. After a few moments, waiting for a response or some sign of life from the ship's crew, the harbor master took a few men and boarded the eerie ship. It was black, with only brief glows of light, lighting their way as the lantern swayed back and forth from the wind that had just picked up. And what they were able to see in the lantern light chilled them to their very soul. Thick pools of blood greeted them on top deck. They moved further up deck towards the helm and gazed upon 2 severed arms still gripping the helm tightly. But the body that belonged to those severed arms was nowhere to be found. They continued to search the ship, and each grisly scene they happened upon was more gruesome than the next. The entire crew was torn from limb to limb. They finally made their way to the captain's quarters, where they found him dead, lying in his bed, still pretty much intact, but he had 2 puncture wounds in his throat and a huge gash in his chest, with his heart being removed. They thought the puncture wounds to be a strange twist added to all this carnage. A few of the other bodies they happened across that weren't completely ripped apart had the same 2 puncture wounds to the neck. But what did they mean? The boarding party collected 2 books from the captain's quarters, the captain's log and the ship's manifest, and continued on. The harbor master read from the captain's log to see if there were any clues to what had happened here. He came to a passage from November 10th, about a week ago. The captain reported some of the crew were complaining of strange noises coming from the cargo hold. Not long after that crew began to disappear. Then on the 12th, the first body was found. The first mate Wilkins, who was savagely torn apart. Then, one after another, more death, more savagery. Someone, or something, was killing the men on the Widow's Weep. But who? The last journal entry was from 2 days ago. The captain said he and a deckhand named Charles had cornered whatever it was in the cargo hold and locked it in. After reading that the harbor master and his men checked the cargo hold but found nothing, no signs of carnage or disturbance, and nothing was missing from the manifest. All personal items belonging to Count Valois was still on board. Speaking of the Count, it said on the manifest that he was a passenger, but after checking the stateroom, there was no sign of the man, no sign of anyone even staying in the room, and his corpse was not found amongst the dead. What happened to the young Count? About an hour after the ship had crashed upon the docks, out of the commotion and chaos emerged a stately fellow, claiming to be the Count's lawyer, and produced a letter to the harbor master, written in the Count's hand and stamped with his official seal, asking for his effects to be delivered to his 2 properties, the mansion in the French Quarter and his mansion in the bayou. The harbor master agreed and sent the Count's belongings on their way. The Count himself was not seen officially until a week after the crash, at a dinner party held by Marie Latreille, who was pretty much the who's who in New Orleans high society at the time. Little did people know, though, is the first disappearance happened that night, the beginning of a stream of many. A maid at the party, named Julie Leclerc, was the first. She was never found. Then maids from all around the city, from the finest households, started to disappear, and people started to notice there were always 2 constants. The parties were at night, and the Count was always in attendance. People had their suspicions now, but that's all they were, suspicions. He was a Count. He was descended from royalty. It would not be polite or proper to question such a gentleman in high society. Then bodies started to be found across the city, with having 2 puncture holes to the neck, dead and drained blood, with the bodies always being found near the vicinity of the Count's properties. People started to be quite alarmed and angered over the deaths of their loved ones. Many who were last seen near are going into one of the Count's mansions. So the sheriff and an angry mob tracked the Count down to his mansion in the bayou, or so they thought. The mansion was empty. The Count was not home, but they did find the remains of some of the missing, savagely torn apart and drained of blood. They burnt his mansion in the bayou down to its foundation, then searched his mansion in the French Quarter, but once again they found nothing. He just simply disappeared, leaving death and carnage in his wake. People were shocked at first, not understanding how a young gentleman such as the Count could perform such savagery. We now know that answer. We now have a name for what he is. For he is a vampire, the death that stalks the night. The people thought the Count had been gone for good, but not long after people started to disappear again, and their bodies found with 2 puncture holes to the neck, completely drained of blood. It's continued throughout the years. No matter the decade, no matter the century, it continues. He's still out there, feeding. So whatever you do, however safe you feel, don't walk the streets of New Orleans at night. Leopold's Waltz of the Dead. There was a young composer named Leopold Montgomery who resided in the lush landscape of Savannah, Georgia, during the mid-1800s. He lived on his family's estate, a blue-painted manor on a grassy knoll, surrounded by fields of tobacco. He was a struggling artist, toiling up in the attic on his compositions, hoping that he might write the next masterpiece. Long into the nights, he would burn the midnight oil, even to the point of his fingers starting to cramp and bleed. No matter how hard he tried, however, he just could not succeed. Piece after piece were rejected. He was practically shunned by the finest households in Savannah from ever playing his pieces at future balls, parties, and catered affairs. Thankfully for him, his family was rich, so he was able to press on. But he was becoming despondent, melancholic, and angry, and most of all, desperate. Until one night, however, during the winter of 1839, after hours and hours of working on his latest piece, he descended from his attic studio with a zest in his step, smiling and filled with a joy at what he had just done. He told his family that he had just composed his finest work yet, that he had finally accomplished what he set out to do, and that was to write the next classical masterpiece, and he called it the Waltz des Morts, the Waltz of the Dead. His family was skeptical, however, for they too, just as others in the community, knew that his music just wasn't very good. He begged and he pleaded for his parents to let him play it at their famous Christmas ball that was fast approaching. They were hesitant, to say the least, especially his mother. Their Christmas ball was known throughout the South as being one of the most lavish parties of the year. The who's who would be there. She did not want to be embarrassed, but that is exactly why Leopold persisted. For he knew Some of the finest people in music would be there, and he needed to be heard. His mother finally relented, and he was allowed to perform at the upcoming ball on Christmas Eve. He waited and waited, and the night finally came. It is said he came out to the piano wearing a half-skeleton mask and dressed in black with purple trimmings. Witnesses report his parents to have stood in the corner of the ballroom with a look of nervousness festooned across their faces, and those in attendance condescendingly clapping, waiting for him to fail. He bowed to the crowd, then sat on the bench, flexing his fingers before placing them on the keys. He then whispered, "Now dance to my Waltz of the Dead." He began to play, and almost instantly the guests began to dance. He caressed the ivory keys with haunting strokes, and played like he never had before. It was said that the likes of Mozart and Chopin could not have composed a finer piece. The music that was emanating from the piano that night was haunting, and some of the most beautiful the people in attendance had ever heard. Once he was done, the people clapped and cheered. Leopold then rose from his seat and bowed once more. He then turned to his parents. He grinned at them and bowed. They were smiling and clapping, very proud of their son, I'm sure. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, without notice or warning, they both collapsed, dead, on the ballroom floor. The doctors in attendance rushed to their side to try and give aid, but it was too late. Instantly they died, with no cause and no reason. The community was saddened to lose two of its most influential members, but they were very excited to celebrate their son. Word of his talent began to spread far and wide, and he was asked to perform at all of the finest get-togethers all throughout the South. The finest families welcomed him back to perform his haunting waltz, and perform he did. He played beautifully every time. However, at the end of every performance, after he had bowed to the owners of the house to show his appreciation, they keeled over dead without warning, clapping and smiling one moment, then dead the next. People were becoming frightened and came to the realization of the only common trace linking these tragic incidents, and it was Leopold and his deadly waltz. Some of the finest people in the community were taken after hearing the haunted melody, including his own parents, and the remaining members of Savannah's high society did not want to risk the chance of being next. Watch out for Leopold's grin and his waltz of the dead, the people would warn. It became bedtime ghost stories told to the children, warning them to be wary of the man in black playing his haunted piano. Leopold was once again shunned, and he was banished from the community. Rumors began to spread, asking and wondering how a mostly inept artist all of a sudden create a musical piece of art and could play beautifully seemingly overnight. They claim he sold his soul to the devil in exchange for his talents. The other rumor was he was gifted his talent from the devil so he could claim the souls of the people he played for. Leopold was called the devil's composer and death's musician after the tragic events. He could be heard afterwards in his seclusion, playing his waltz all through the night, frightening whoever would pass. So no matter what you believe, whichever the rumor, if the man in black asks to play at your catered affair, politely turn him away, for you may be next to join. The Waltz of the Dead. The Chatterley Asylum. I am a night watchman at the abandoned Chatterley Sanitarium and Criminally Insane Institute. I've worked patrolling the decrepit old property for the last 10 years, and I can honestly tell you it's been one of the easiest jobs one can ask for. Unlike my other peers who patrol and protect old abandoned supposedly haunted buildings, who have horrifying stories of encountering violent homeless men, or seeing ghosts, or coming across satanic cults, I myself have not. I haven't even experienced a break-in. That was until a few hours ago. My shift started like any other. I clocked in and put my lunch in the office refrigerator. I then sat down at my desk and started reading my book before making my first round of the property. Like I said, the job was easy. It consisted mostly of lounging between patrols. The first patrol went smoothly. Besides a few strange noises, nothing was out of the ordinary. But little did I realize how wrong I was about to be. After about an hour after my first patrol, I sat my book down, even though I was deeply enthralled, and ate my lunch. Midway through my meaty burrito, I heard more noises. The sound of shuffling and moving about echoed through the decaying corridors. I stopped chewing and got very quiet, trying to hone in on the noises. I began to make out what sounded to be faint voices in the distance. I became startled. I was supposed to be the only one here. I picked up my cell phone and informed my supervisor of the situation and that the police might have to be called. I then got up from my desk and went to go investigate the noises. As I walked down the old corridor, where they locked up the most violent of patients, I checked inside each cell as I passed. I could see nothing strange or unusual as I shined my flashlight into each room, until I reached the cafeteria at the end of the hall. I could see a soft glow through the grime-covered windows on top of the door, and as I got closer, I could swear I heard rhythmic chanting. I got low, and as I reached the window on the door, I heard a blood-curdling scream that almost sent me flying. I wasn't expecting that. My heart was racing at that point. It felt like I was having a damn heart attack. I tried to compose myself, and I peered into the cafeteria window. I was shocked and frightened at the scene that greeted me. There were several individuals in cloaks, surrounding 2 nude women on the floor. I reached for my phone with my shaking hand and whispered frantically to my supervisor to call the police. Help was on the way, but I couldn't just sit here, hiding behind this door. Those 2 poor ladies could still be alive and need my help. I reached down to my holster and pulled out my gun. I took a deep breath and entered the room. Kicking in the doors to the cafeteria, I screamed, "Nobody move, damn it! Stop what you're doing. The police have been called and are on their way." I began choking on my words as I completed the sentence. The smell in the room hit my sensories. Holy shit, the smell! What the hell is that? My eyes began to water, blinding me for a moment. I raised my gun and screamed, "Don't fucking move!" while I tried to catch my bearings. The smells that greeted me could only be described as a murder's row of used music festival porta potties, all lined up after the festival's end. All walks of life made their mark inside. It was a bouquet of shit and death, wafting all around me. I began to gag again. I was able to compose myself enough to wipe the tears from my eyes, which felt like acid at this point, and the scene in the room froze me in place. Several brown candles adorned a brown painted pentagram in a circle, and in the center laid the two women, dead. Their anuses had been hollowed out, and jars of their bodily fluids and excrements sat next to their once lively bodies. I tried to hide the tremble in my body, but the death and the horrific smell of 1,000 gushing colons was making me weak. I asked, "Who are you sick fucks, and what they were doing at my asylum?" The shrouded figure in the middle of the group spoke up and lifted his hood. He was an older man, and he informed me in a very stately manner that they were the Stool of Decay, a shit cult that worshipped at the altar of Stoolzabub, the demon lord of shit and all other unholy excrement. And they were carrying out a sacrifice to appease their lord and bring him back to our mortal world. I stood there stunned. A shit cult? Really? I've heard of cults, of course, but I didn't know there were shrouded up fuckers out there prancing around covered in shit. I told the group of poo fairies to turn around and place their hands high above their heads and hug the wall. At that point, I was able to get a closer look at everything. The brown painted pentagram was drawn not in paint, but in feces, and there was writing on the walls, written in blood and shit, and it read, "For our Lord of Shit, our Master of Stench, the bringer of flies, we offer you these sacrifices so that you may walk this earth once again to unleash your holy sludgery." My God, I thought, what sick fucks. I stood there starting to feel high off what others who have stumbled upon a shit cult call the old familiars, shit and funk. I hoped the police would arrive soon. I didn't know how much longer I could last. I was becoming punch drunk off ripe assholes and old decaying peppery chili pots. Just as I was becoming weak, the group started chanting. It was quite eerie, actually. It was not understandable. Definitely a language I've never heard before. Almost reminiscent of the Omen movie yodeling. I screamed for them to cut that shit out. They did not listen. Instead, they began to wiggle and dance. They moved their bodies like they were trying to work something out. Suddenly, they stopped gyrating and one by one began to squat in unison. "What's this?" I exclaimed. I stepped back, not knowing what to expect. Then, like a chorus of funk, the loudest and moistest of farts expelled from their holes, so powerful even that their shrouds waved in the air as the gas passed through. I was being suffocated, I thought. They're trying to get me to pass out so they can make their escape. I mustered up my second wind, and as I did, I heard a rumbling. The walls began to shake. "Oh, great! What the fuck is this?" I screamed. "A cave-in?" Just then the cult leader piped up. "No, you silly man. Here comes our Lord. Gaze upon his porcelain throne in the corner and wait." I looked over, and to my surprise, there was a toilet just sitting in the right side corner of the room. I stood there and waited. I swear the noises emanating from their assholes were getting louder and louder as the noises in the walls got closer and closer. The toilet began to hop and shake, and I could see a brown liquid starting to boil over the lid. The cult members began to wiggle and jiggle once more, and in unison gave one last toot, and up popped Stoolzabub, the dark lord of shit. The cult members ushered him in like a chorus of angels playing their butt trumpets. He smirked at me and sat atop his porcelain throne. He then sharply pointed towards the cult members, and with one collected thrust, They shat on the floor. At this point, I must tell you, my nose was about to fall off. I mean, how much shit can one person ingest in the span of an hour? My olfactories were about to shut down and close up shop. Stoolsabub then growled and pointed in my direction and ordered me to bow at his fecal magnificence. I was staggered at this point. My head was spinning. It's like I was seeing stars, but they weren't stars that I was looking at, spinning around my head. They were tiny brown demons with huge asses and green gas emanating from their devilishly plump cheeks. I was grasping for any fresh air I could find. Then Stoolsabub chuckled and told me to prepare to experience 100 years of unholy shit from the asylum's most notorious anuses. As he said those haunting words, I heard a commotion from down the hall, from the old maximum security ward. The doors of the cells began to open and shut violently. Then I heard the bursting of pipes, followed by the sounds of liquid splashing about. Then Stoolsabub said, "Behold the chocolatey river of doom and dismay." I hesitantly looked down, and it was a choca river pouring into the room, and floating on top, like canoes riding down the shit rapids, were old rusty bedpans that had belonged to the evilest of evil criminals that had ever walked these halls. Even more disturbing was the bedpans were filled with fresh logs, so fresh that you could see the steam rising from them. The Lord of Sphincters then ordered me to behold the river of evil, bask in the ambiance of what this institution's finest has to offer from beyond the grave. Evil-haunted spectral shits, I thought. Well, that's a first for me. I didn't know ghosts could shit, but here we are. And they're evil spirits to boot. So I guess you could call them poltershites. I fell to my knees. I could take no more of this parade of funk. Surrounded by the haunted fecals of yesteryear, I succumbed to Stoolsabub's warm, squishy embrace. Like a grandmother's inviting hug when you return home for the holidays, I began to get comfortable and relaxed in my new milk chocolatey realm. Just as I was being sucked into the hole of functified eternal servitude, my phone rang, snapping me from my fecal trance. I woke, too, slapping his poo hand away from me. My flight, fight, or shite response must have kicked in, and at that very second, because I pulled out my gun once again and blew away the cult shit members that tried to attack me. I then turned the revolver at Stoolsabub and pulled the trigger, hitting him right between the eyes, which were a couple of kernels of corn. All he did was laugh and motion for the rest of his crap entourage to attack me. I tried firing at the rest of the fecal cult members, but ran out of bullets. I dropped my gun and ran to my office, locking myself in. The walls are closing in. My time is up. They're gassing me out through the vents, with the smell of the swampiest of asses. A collection from the evilest of colons, I was told. I hear them mocking me through the door. I'm suffocating slowly. If anyone finds this recording on my phone, please, tell my loved ones I tried, and tell them I love them. The Lovers. My dearest friend, I long to hold you in my arms again, and see the stars shine in your eyes, and live a life of promises as time goes by. Outreach your hand and place it within mine, for I'll protect you till the end of time. If the cruelties of life should cause you to crumble or even stumble, Just fall into me. My outreached arms will be there to catch you and keep you warm in your time of need. We'll walk through this life hand in hand, no matter what's thrown at us. With our love, we'll withstand. Nothing can change. Our love will remain the same, for it's plain to see we were always meant to be. For I love you, and you love me. Deadly lovers. People see us walk through this life deep in love, which we are, but there's more than what's seen to the eyes above. Hidden beneath our love's facade is a pile of bodies that lie underneath the sod. A murderous pair we truly be. Macabre delights highlight our murderous spree. One by one, we kill without a care. We sit atop the bodies, lost in each other's stare. My mistress of death, I love only you. You showed me a love I never even knew. So place your deadly hand in mine, and we'll leave a string of bodies behind. A bloody aftermath is what they'll see, along with the love I have for you and you have for me. A murderous couple that was always meant to be. Cursed Remains by the Prowler. I stare at the heart of the candle-lit flame, surrounded by darkness in the seclusion of my study. The echoes from the voices that are being carried through the wind-swept halls of this ancient manor are speaking to me. In an ominous tone, they communicate their aspirations of woe and torment that wither my mind and plague my soul. This once lively home that was filled with warmth and laughter has become a retreat of sadness and pain with the passing of its more innocent residents. I have become the last branch on my once strong-rooted familial tree that has now blackened from whatever curse that had caused it to rot. One by one, I have lost my loved ones, my beautiful wife, my lovely children, the futures of this family taken away by the evil that lurks this manor's halls. I think I could take solace in my seclusion if the voices I heard were that of my loved ones, but sadly, I know it not to be. These malevolent voices instead torment my every thought and action. What do they want from me? Why do they continue to let me live? I've accepted my stewardship of maintaining my ancestral home, aging as it does, for I know I shall never leave, never be with my family once again. For I know I am cursed. The Mask, written by the Prowler. Jonathan, hello. Right on time. Perfect way to start a new job. Now, before you begin, there are a few procedures I'd like to go over with you on how we like things done here at Mephisto's Halloween shop. Here's your name badge, and please make sure you keep this on you at all times. for it will help you get into any door in the building. Grab your things and come with me to the back. Now, this door is locked for many reasons, so when you want to enter, just swipe your name badge across the screen next to the door here. The lockers are to the right. The employee bathroom is to the left. Oh, what is it, my boy? You look completely frightened. Oh, the red splatters on the floor. It's nothing to worry about, Jonathan. One of the other employees had a slight accident just before you came in. We had to send him home early, so you are quite needed around here today. Now follow me, and let me show you what you'll be doing around here. Let's start with restocking the shelves. You must stay on top of this at all times. Our customers just go crazy for our props and accessories, from the witches' cauldrons and the fake bats and rats, to the severed limbs and the fake blood-covered weapons. Now on to the next. Jonathan, keep up, please. Now what seems to be the problem? What are you trembling about? Yes, the severed limbs do feel real. You are correct. But they're not, you silly boy. You just have the finest supplier of fake limbs in the business, that's all. And yes, the blood on these weapons do look 100% like the real thing. Our artists do a spectacular job of painting them, do they not? Now, if you'll please, may we continue? I still have so many things to show you before you get started. Here is where the store makes its most money. The masks, Jonathan. We have the finest collection in the entire country, I guarantee it. Anything a customer is looking for, we promise to have it. We even custom create masks for what a customer is looking for. Ah, yes, Jonathan. Please, you look mesmerized. I can't blame you. I know you've never seen a collection like this. Jonathan, are you all right? What are you looking at over there? Oh, yes. Well, don't be frightened. That mask was just freshly painted, you see. That's why it's dripping. And it's not blood, by the way. Don't be absurd. It's just paint that our artist came up with to seem realistic. Where are you going, Jonathan? Don't run away. And what are you doing with that name badge? Don't you dare take that off. I told you. I don't care if you're quitting. Don't take off that badge. Stupid kid. I warned you to never take that name badge off while inside the store. It's the only thing that protected you. Oh well, you wouldn't have lasted here anyway, but you'll make an excellent addition to our mask display. Say hello to Ben and Dean. They'll escort you to the back room. Your services will no longer be required. Mommy, can I get a mask for Halloween? Yes, honey. Go over to the wall and pick one out. Wow, cool. That one right there, Mommy. I want that one. It's so scary. All right, honey. Excuse me, sir. My son would like that mask right there on top. The one in the middle? Ah, yes. Madam, you want the Jonathan. What an excellent choice. Old McGinty by the Prowler. I'm frightened when it's close to that time of year, when it's March and the 17th draws near. While the celebrations may be joyous in parts of the world, I know death approaches at any given moment. Every wiggle and jiggle from a charm bracelet makes me cautious, or the sudden smell of corned beef and cabbage makes me nervous, or a rainbow popping up out of nowhere, or the sight of a rogue four-leaf clover chills me to the bone. For these are the sights and sounds to let one know of old McGinty's approach, an Irishman who was killed horrifically 3 centuries ago in the Irish hills, laid out against the ground, and several large stones placed on top of his body, slowly crushing him to death. He was killed by a horde of vengeful Englishmen for the crime of a love that was not his, a carnal love between him and the magistrate's wife. Even though their love was true and burned with 1,000 lifetimes of passion, it was cruelly snuffed out by her abusive husband, the magistrate. Their love was ripped apart that fateful day when he was put to the stone, and with his dying breath, clutching the charm bracelet his love had made for him, he swore he would return to seek his vengeance. Legend has it, he returned one fine rainy Irish night and bludgeoned the men who killed him to death with his shillelagh. And it is told, when he finally got to the magistrate, he was particularly violent. He took his time and tortured the bastard who took his true love away from him. He boiled, ripped, and cut pieces off the magistrate that would leave him useless to a woman, and left him to bleed out and die. You would think revenge would have put old McGinty to rest, but he became a vengeful, hateful spirit, unable to be with his true love even in the afterlife, for she snuffed out her own flame and doomed herself to a lifetime of purgatory when he died, for she could not live a life without her love. So he returns each St. Patrick's Day to seek out his bloodlust and delve out pain with his shillelagh, so others can feel the pain he feels. So if you're sitting alone and get a waft of cabbage and start to hear the clanking of charms, you best run. Don't even turn around, for it's the charms on McGinty's wrist clanking as he raises his arm up, ready to bring his shillelagh down on you. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.